I forget who said it, but they said something to the effect that we, meaning our brains, make no more sense of the world than is necessary to survive in it. Where one of the points they were trying to illustrate is that the human brain, or mind, if for some bizarre reason you think the brain isn't much involved in consciousness, like you're a panpsychist or some BS like that, the brain is, among other things, a prediction generator, and a very poor one at that. And that reminds me of another quote, this one from now dead MAGA racist and Dilbert author Scott Adams. The human mind is a delusion generator, not a window to truth. Yeah, he wrote that. Didn't appear to put much stock in his own words, it seems. And that is a veiled insult I'm going to make a point about later on in this little rant. Alright, let's kick off Season 3 of Noah's Snark. I'm Atheist Josephina, aka AJV. Let's get down to business. I want to preface some of what the science has to say about the way our biology works in regards to how we come to believe facts about the world, which is to say, for the general population, most of what we believe winds up being either false or probably false. We certainly live in a day and age, at least in the United States, where science and facts are basically crapped upon in favor of vibes, which I assert has long been the case for human beings. We generally base our beliefs upon what we want to believe, which is not the same thing as saying we never have good evidential reasons for our beliefs, but as a social species, stories, especially those with fantastical elements, are more compelling for us than brute facts about the natural world because brute facts alone, by themselves, don't tell us much, not until we work them into some larger narrative about life, the universe, and everything we think we understand. It reminds me of something Stranger in a Strange Land author Robert A. Heinlein said, "Man is not a rational animal, he is a rationalizing animal." Boy, I'm loving quotes today. Anyway, the design argument, that ridiculously inductive and a priori teleological argument, that's among many an apologist's favorite argument for the existence of God. Apologists typically use it in relation to the universe or on a smaller scale the human body, often specifically in reference to the human brain. Except if the human brain was so magnificently designed, why is it prone to so many errors? For example, all the cognitive biases, of which there are at least 180. Just in case you're wondering what a cognitive bias is, it's a predictable mental shortcut that attempts to simplify overwhelming amounts of information. Cognitive biases trade speed in decision-making or problem-solving for accuracy, because if there's one thing the human brain generally does not enjoy, it's spending too much energy on thinking. And no one is immune to cognitive biases, not even the highest IQ person on Earth who is not Young-Hoo Kim, something apologists keep saying but haven't bothered to fact-check because that would take too much effort, thus proving my point about the brain prioritizing the conservation of energy. Anyway, the question arises, why would a supposedly intelligent God create us with so many mental shortcomings that warp our perception of reality? Careful before you try answering that, dear apologists. Be careful not to fall prey to one of those biases lingering in your brain. And of course, I should be just as careful because the brain fools us in other ways. For example, the brain can not only be fooled by, say, optical illusions. We don't see the world in real time, as there is a lag time between the time we see something with our eyes and the time we process that information. Yes, it does happen quickly, but it's not instantaneous, even though we experience the world that way. Speaking of the eye, we also have a literal blind spot where the optic nerve passes through the retina, which means we cannot see objects that focus there. Then there's inattentional blindness, a psychological phenomenon where you fail to notice a clearly visible object or event in plain sight because your attention is focused on another task. It occurs due to information overload, due to the brain's natural limitations on how much it can process at once. These numerous failings of the brain do not scream design, in my opinion. How else does the brain fail us? There is confabulation, where the brain often invents explanations after the fact of an event and believes the explanation as a genuine reason. We also detect non-existent patterns in randomness. Our brains evolved to detect patterns quickly to the point of fabricating them, which, by the way, is why the rational person has to be careful in making distinctions between correlation and causation. We can be wildly overconfident. People systematically overestimate their knowledge, their predictive ability, their objectivity, or their competence. We're prone to the illusion of control. For example, engaging in rituals before sports events, or think confidence alone changes the probability of anything. The brain also literally hallucinates reality when we're extremely tired. And most troubling, our memories are easily distorted. Memory is reconstructive. It's not like a video recording. This is why witness testimony is the least respected evidence in a court of law. Are you listening, dear apologists? I'll leave how marvelously shit our marvelous brain is. I'll leave it alone now because I could go on, except I can't think of anything else off the top of my head because I have a bad memory. Oh yeah, our decision-making and personalities are also typically affected by drugs, hunger, and the state of our gut microbiome. Of course, we're not usually aware of all these factors that affect the brain because the brain is stupid. Most people aren't even internally and externally self-aware, yet think they are. Given the shortcomings and shortcuts the brain engages in, which is no doubt due to Adam and Eve's sin, which corrupted God's perfect plan, it's no wonder that when you take the collective outcome of human thought, there's no doubt we've put forth more erroneous or bad information than factual information. When you realize we have so many problematic brain functions and realize those functions are not there to accurately record and judge reality, you might be inclined to ask, among other questions, are our brains wired to believe false things? The scientific method, as a formal, systematic process, has been around for approximately 400 years, maturing during the scientific revolution, circa 1500 to 1700, with Sir Francis Bacon establishing its formal foundation in the early 1600s. Now, it's indisputable that the scientific method is the best way for knowing facts about the natural world, but the interpretation of those facts can be suspect, which is why a scientific theory, properly understood, is not 100% fact, but rather a substantiated explanation of natural phenomenon based on a vast body of evidence. That's what a theory is when discussing scientific theories. Difficult, I know. And let's not forget these stories can be modified or updated or replaced if new data emerges. While facts are observable and repeatable data, theories explain those facts and not always accurately. Why not? Because of the limitations of our brains. It's as if a God designed the human brain, they designed it to ask why. Why this? Why that? But also designed the brain to rubber stamp incorrect answers. But seriously, for a very large percentage of people, it's the default setting of a person's brain in adulthood to believe those things that align with the narrative they grew up with the ideas that were reinforced upon them, pounded into them during their formative years, creating strong synaptic ties that hold when synaptic pruning in the brain ends in the person's mid to late 20s. Back when I taught ethics for manual therapists, I always somewhat jokingly told my students to always be on their toes with patients and clients because people are crazy. I probably sounded unsympathetic when I said that, but I didn't mean to be, not really. As someone who doesn't really believe in free will, or at best, very limited free will depending on how you want to define that, I would like to be more sympathetic, doesn't always work, towards people who, not necessarily through any fault of their own, came to have false, some would even say crazy, beliefs and ideas. As I implied earlier, but should now make clear, people generally base their beliefs more on what they feel, on what they want to be true, on how their hormones are affecting their brain and body, not on what the brain is actually discerning as brute facts about the world, because the brain as a purely logical reasoning machine doesn't really exist. We're not Vulcans on Star Trek. That said, should we be kinder to people who believe false or, in our own opinions, dumb things? I'm not asking this just as a non-believer. I'm asking this as a human being and as a reminder to myself that it's hardly ever the case where one person changes another person's mind with cold, hard evidence, whatever you think cold, hard evidence to be. Despite all the debates that occur, atheist versus theist, liberal versus conservative, cat people versus dog people, cats are objectively cooler than dogs, we all just love watching and listening to debates. But no one's mind is ever changed unless the person's feeling towards the cold, hard evidence or argument changes. This is why it's almost always the case that when a non-believer turns into a believer, it's from a place of depression, despair, or some kind of existential angst. People, generally speaking, and I'm sorry for using all these generalizations, people simply don't convert to one of the Abrahamic religions when their life is already fulfilling. The Abrahamic religions, they sell its wares based on hope. So if feelings tend to be the rationale, so to speak, for beliefs, and this is the way we're built, what with the rationalizing prefrontal cortex coming in last in our evolutionary development, it would seem the most rational thing to do when debating other people is to be as civil as possible, unless, of course, there is no possible redemption for, say, a violent neo-Nazi. By the way, insulting someone's beliefs tends to lead that person to double down on that belief. It's a cognitive dissonance reduction technique. Unfortunately, civility will not get you far with some people, particularly with people counting on you to remain civil while they, ransack a nation. Some people deserve to be mocked, or, maybe they don't, but my feelings take over sometimes and get the better of my rational temperament. I literally cannot help being snarky sometimes, just like some apologists can't help but be condescending. I'm not saying those behaviors should be rewarded because we can't help them, just that it might be helpful to recognize our weaknesses. We're not wired to take the time to discern facts about the world that aren't concerned with our immediate or even future survival. Like any skill, being logical and rational, those are skills that need to be developed and nurtured. It seemed like we were on that path for a little while, which might be a mistaken perception on my behalf, but now we're in the midst of a new dark ages because everything is being done for us. The internet and AI are feeding us all the information we need or want. It's telling us how to navigate. It'll create music and animation for us out of the most brain-dead prompts. Preachers, politicians, and CEOs have always known that educated, rational people are a threat to their existence, and they've gone to great lengths to prevent education for the masses. Case in point, Americans are so dumb, they elect people even dumber than they are to run the nation. Many white evangelical Christian nationalists don't believe in evolution, they don't believe it ever occurred, and maybe they're right. We still behave like savages despite our technological advancements. Maybe if we start coming to terms with the liability the brain presents for us, maybe we can take a moment's pause to reflect on our decisions, our actions, and our interactions. I don't see why that's a bad thing unless you're a grifter. The brain may be the most complex organ we know, but that doesn't mean it really is all that special. Bacteria are the dominant life form on Earth, and they don't even have brains. It's time to stop acting like we don't either. Time to stop letting our emotions drive the consciousness car all the time, as author Mark Manson would put it. Look where it's gotten us. Too lazy to give a fuck late-stage capitalism is killing us. So go read a book, not one written by AI, preferably. Go touch some grass. Go hang out with your friends without scrolling through your phone. These things objectively make us happier, and if we're going to be ruled by emotion and not our rational mind, then shouldn't we want to be happy most of the time? That's a question only a rational, logical brain can answer, although I could be wrong. Thank you for listening to Noah's Snark. I'm Atheist Josephina, aka AJV. If you enjoyed this podcast and like this kind of content, please consider subscribing. Until next time, let evidence guide you and wonder inspire you.